Does studying for an English standardized test get you closer to fluency?
Maybe.
Let's talk about it.
What's up, guys? Welcome to Wide World Friends English. We get this question quite often, and we get a lot of students that feel like studying for the TOEFL exam, the TOEIC exam, or the IELTS exam is going to get them closer to fluency, or it's going to help them get to fluency faster. We have mixed feelings on this.
The answer is yes and no. Yes, because you will absolutely grow in your vocabulary, you will grow in your grammar, you will grow in the proper way to read and write and even listen to some passages in English. However, no, because it's very sterile English. It's very proper English. We've met many people. They have gotten a very good score on the TOEFL, a very good score on the IELTS, and they can't really communicate. And the inverse of that, people that can communicate surprisingly well. I would consider them functionally fluent, but they still struggle to pass those standardized tests. So what's the deal? Why is it a yes-no kind of answer?
It comes down to the point that these standardized tests are not for you. They are for someone else. They are to give a standardized measure of your speaking and reading ability in an academic context or in a work context to someone else. These tests are not designed to help you reach fluency. That's not their goal. Their goal is just to measure. And even still, the way that they measure those things is by academic jargon, by academic language, academic standards, a very proper English in a way. Now, yes, you might get some slang thrown in there here and there, but we don't speak like a test. We really don't. If you get to where you are perfectly fluent in test English, you're going to come to America, go to the grocery store, and be shocked at what you hear. You're not going to be hearing complete sentences. You're not going to be hearing proper things. You're not going to be hearing, so how are you doing today? You're not going to hear that as much. You're going to hear, what's up, man? What's cracking? You're going to hear like these really weird idiomatic slang terms. Even if you get into an academic setting, you might hear classmates, and the way that they talk is very informal. The way that you talk to your professor, they might speak in much more complete terms or in complete sentences, but they are also going to do a lot of minor sentences backed up by paralanguage. One of the things that's missing from these standardized exams is paralanguage.
Paralanguage is anything that's above just the content of the words themselves. That's body language, facial expressions, tone, pitch, speed, pause, and even distance from the person that you're speaking to. If you don't have any of that information, that's a lot of missing information. And so you could be fluent in the content part, but honestly, that is largely robotic. It's like an AI generator that can generate really proper articles. But when you actually come down to it and you start to question, like, what's the motivation behind this AI generated article, or what's the conclusions it's actually trying to reach, it's surprisingly light. As opposed to that, you have people that can speak very simple words, very simple sentences, but what they're actually communicating comes across really clearly. The goal of language, generally speaking, is to be able to communicate to people, to real people. So these standardized tests, they are not trying to get you to figure out whether or not you can communicate to another human being. They're trying to figure out how much English do you actually know.
In textbook English is the thing, mainly. It's textbook English, your memorized vocabulary knowledge, how well you can comprehend the main idea of a text, which is a very useful and practical skill. But the texts are always designed the same way. They're designed with the same format and the same order, the same structure every single time. When you study for a standardized exam, you get a very narrow type of English to study for. You get a very specific word set. Your focus is to memorize. That's the thing that's probably the most painful, is after you pass the test, if you go for 6 months without studying anything and you come back to the same material, you won't be able to do it because it was short-term memory. So one of the other things is you should not be memorizing a language. And these standardized tests often encourage that to a degree. They encourage you to memorize patterns or memorize speaking templates or memorize writing templates. They encourage you to focus on creating a 60-second response in 15 seconds or after reading a little prompt. Like, are you going to have exactly 15 seconds to form a response when somebody asks you a question? No. Can you get a little bit of time to think? You can. But is it going to be a 60-second response that's formed with the speaking template? No, it's not. Test logic is different. Passing a test and the logic behind that is very different from learning a language and being able to use it comfortably and being able to use it functionally. If you need the test score in order to reach a goal, it will be helpful. And the longer you study for the test, the more helpful that will become. So for example, if you're studying for the TOEFL and it takes you 2 years to study, you're not using short-term memory necessarily. At first it's short-term, but then you're building more and more. And though the skills that you're learning are kind of robotic and very structured, and if you get outside of that structure, you're in trouble. But you will be learning those words and learning to recognize those words and learning the formulas and the writing templates. You're going to be able to use those in other places more easily later because you've been doing it for 2 years. But if your goal is to study for 6 weeks and then take the test and walk away with whatever score you get, that's short-term memory. Even 6 months, I would say, that is very short-term memory. You're going to forget a lot and you're going to slide backwards a lot.
The hard part with this question is how you really define fluency, because some people just define fluency as merely accomplishing the goal that they set out to do. Remembering 10,000 words, or being able to enter into an English-speaking university, or trying to get this job that requires me to have X score on the TOEFL exam. We get it. We get that those are real goals. And in that way, the standardized tests like the TOEFL and the IELTS are very helpful because they are a form of accountability that gets you to your goal. However, that's not our definition of fluency. Our definition of fluency is to be able to use English comfortably. And a lot of times we have met so many students that have scored phenomenally high on these standardized English tests. But if you're just like chatting with them, just talking with them about life or their dreams or why they're here in the States, they can falter. And so for you, you have to actually answer this question for yourself of what are you expecting to do with your language? If you're expecting to try to get a competitive job here, then a standardized test is a decent way for you to measure that. The hard part is if you say, no, that's not my job is to be able to communicate well, all of a sudden, that measure becomes actually surprisingly difficult because how do you measure how well are you communicating with a person? You have to use some sort of other metric in order for you to measure how close are you to being there? How close are you to fluency? That's why standardized English exams tend to get so much clout because they say we have a standardized measure for how knowledgeable you are in English. But the real question is how close are you to your goals in English?
But if you are in a non-English speaking country and you cannot afford a tutor or a teacher as easily, this is a way that a lot of people get feedback. A lot of people don't know how they're doing in their language learning until they take a test and get a score back. The problem is there's not a lot of wiggle room. You could have answered something fairly fluently and fairly well, very similar to how a native speaker would have, and still get punished by points for not doing it their way, or the standardized way, or the proper way. That score could be misleading if you're not careful. One of the things that we suggest is try to get your feedback from an English speaker, some friend who's an English speaker, from a tutor or a teacher, even from a small community of people that have skills much higher than you and skills that are lower than you. That way you're hearing it from both sides, what you do well and what you don't do well, what is clear and what is unclear. The thing is you need other people and you need feedback, and you need feedback ideally through the whole process, even if your goal is to pass a test. Learning a language is not contained to a rubric. It's not contained to some test standard. Learning a language for fluency is something that should be more free. It's can you express yourself? Can you communicate comfortably and easily? Being able to communicate comfortably is a far more helpful metric for most situations. But again, if you need that test score because that's the way your education system works and that's where you're comfortable, you want something very standardized, go that way for a little bit. But also make sure you add plenty of comfortable English, informal English conversation and listening from YouTube, from community members in order to make sure that you level things off. That way you don't have such a proper and high form of English that you use that's going to make you sound alien to everybody else. Make sure you are able to communicate in a daily format, in a very comfortable format.
This is the exact reason why at Fluency Fast Track we try to give detailed feedback to all of our students. And sometimes it can seem overwhelming to some of them to say, like, after a 30-minute conversation, we have 40 points of feedback that we could say, hey, you said that, but you could say it better like this. And that can be scary for some people. But the point is that over the course of a year, you'd be surprised at how shorter that list becomes. As not fancy as that sounds, that is progression towards fluency. It's the first time you have a conversation with somebody, you get 40 points off. You get 40 points where you could have said something better. And then at the end of the year, you have 20 points where you could have said something better. And you keep going to where, honestly, there's just not too many mistakes anymore. Yes, you probably say a little bit better or a little bit more native-like, but all of a sudden, the mistakes that you've been making for a long time aren't there anymore. And it's because of that detailed feedback, that detailed, ongoing, regular feedback, relationship, accountability, community that you have, that this person says, you're not making those mistakes anymore. That's awesome. But you don't get that from a standardized exam. All you get is a score that gets better. How is it better? What mistakes did you make? What specific grammar structures are you making a mistake with?
Is it even that? Are you making mistakes with English or are you making mistakes with proper English? What's the difference? Were you clear? You don't know. Maybe you just broke their metric. Maybe you were just speaking and you did so accurately, but outside of what the test actually measures. You don't know, and they can't tell you that. That's not what a test can answer, especially a test with thousands of people taking it every day.
So if you want a different metric in order for you to figure out whether or not you are progressing towards fluency, we highly recommend getting an English-speaking friend that's willing to be honest with you, to say, hey, last year, I remember when you were making this kind of mistake, and you're not making that mistake anymore. However, you're still making this mistake. That is a metric. It sounds not as fancy as getting, hundreds of points on a test, but that metric is a metric that will lead you closer and closer to actually being fluent in English.
So if you're curious about a step-by-step process in order to reach fluency, we have a series of videos here. We walk you through different steps, different phases in that journey, and the ways that you will be shifting gears as you go, especially from high intermediate to functional fluency. How do you do that? How do you get there? What does that look like? We have those steps for you. You can watch that short video series right here.
All right, guys, thank you so much for watching. And we hope that you continue to progress towards fluency and enjoy it. Catch you on the next one.